There's a deeper level to this game.
I'm Matt.
I'm Kerry.
We are the Stagmer brothers, a Baltimore knife and sword. We're going to be building some of your favorite weapons, and some weapons that you've never seen before.
This is Man-at-Arms, REFORGED. With the huge popularity for Westworld, we knew that we were going to have to build this Bowie knife. Matt's been very excited about this build because as the show has been progressing, we went from something where we really kind of had an unknown. Would it just be a simple thing and the robots would take over and they'd destroy everybody, or would it be a very complex story? And it's certainly proven to be extremely complex. It's pretty exciting. I'll admit, I binge-watched season 2 last night.
To get started on forging the blade for our Bowie from Westworld, I'm going to start with a piece of 1095 high carbon steel. It's a really nice material to make a nice sharp cutting knife. I'm basically going to do most of this forging by hand, but I'm just going to establish a point.
And the easiest way to do that is to actually start on the horn of the anvil, creating a much easier and faster taper. The next step in forging this knife is to move to the Bradley and draw our taper out for the blade. We want it thicker at the shoulder than it is at the point, creating what we know as a distal tapered blade. To forge this blade, it can all be done by hand, but the die setup we have on the Bradley power hammer mimics that of a sledgehammer, and it'll just get the job done a lot faster.
All right, so at this point, doesn't look like much, looks like a banana. I made my point. I distal tapered the blade out so it's thinner at the tip than it is the shoulder, and I induced this curve. The reason I induced this curve on purpose is I'm actually going to turn this inside of the curve into our cutting edge. So when I start forging my bevels on the inside of this, the whole blade's going to start straightening out to our final shape, then I'll cool it off, flip it around, and draw out the tang.
With the bevels of the blade now forged in, and it's basically to its rough shape, it's now time to remove all the excess material that's at the end of the bar. So I flip the material around and then move to the Nasal power hammer and cut the excess material off. I then immediately use the flat dies on the power hammer to forge out my tang. With the tang now drawn out and the base of the blade finished, just a few minor touches and we'll be ready to grind.
With our Bowie knife now forged, time to move on to the grinding. Now I've wanted to make this knife ever since season 1. I guess because I'm a weapons maker, I keyed in on it and started putting together my own theories of who the man in black actually was. But now, let's just start by profile grinding this knife, establish the clip point here on the back edge, just true up the entire perimeter, and then we'll move on to establishing that really nice hollow ground edge.
I'm going to be making the Westworld Bowie handle out of African blackwood. Kerry has drawn the handle shape on a CAD software, and I'm going to turn the handle based off of this drawing. We'll be turning it in between centers on this South Bend lathe. This is different than a CNC lathe because I have to manually turn all the knobs to make the cutter remove material.
Tanner now measures and marks the different high and low points of this handle. That'll give him reference as he begins to make the cut.
Now that the shape of the Bowie is completely finalized, we can now move on to forging the guard for it. I'm actually going to use a leftover little ingot of bronze to forge our guard. Now the key thing when forging bronze is to make sure that you don't get it too hot. If you get it too hot in the forge, when you go to hit it, it's just gonna crumble. So I have to be very careful to forge it at a much lower temperature than you normally see us forge steel. I'm gonna forge basically a flat guard that tapers out to the ends, then curl those two ends up, and we'll be good to go.
I'm just gonna lay the material over the corner of the anvil, start my bend, hit it back on the flat, and rotate my blows to keep it nice and even until I get my desired form. After that, I'll go back to the forge and repeat the process on the other side.
Matt's Bowie knife blade is ready for heat treating. Because it's so thick here and very thin at the point, what I'm going to do, I'm going to stick it in the furnace this way with the point sticking out and gain approximately 700 degrees. At that point, I will flip it and put it in the forge completely, and the whole blade will come up to an even 1480 to approximately 1500 degrees Fahrenheit. And then it goes into our quenching medium.
All right, now our 1095 Bowie knife blade has been both heat treated and tempered. It's time to do the final grind. You can see that I left the edge thickness at about 1.5 millimeters, maybe 2 millimeters thick to play it safe on the heat treat. Sometimes when you have a really thick backed knife and a thin edge, it can crack during the heat treat when things move around. So I wanted to play it safe. Now, we're just gonna go back to the rough grit, refine that edge down nice and sharp, run it through the grits, and polish it.
When doing a hollow grind, especially after heat treat, it's very important to use fresh belts, especially with an edge that's this thin and this fine. If you don't, you're gonna end up burning your edge and ruining your heat treat.
So at this point, I've ground my edge to a 60 grit. It's almost sharp on the edge. The flat is all the way through a 120 grit. Now, I do something a little different when I'm hollow grinding that I don't do when I'm flat grinding, and that is that I skip a grit in between each of my polishes. So I'm gonna go straight from a 60 grit to a 120 on the edge. That way I can really see all my underlying lines, make sure everything's nice and polished out, and I don't get all the way through the polishing and see some rough grit in my edge, and that's a no-no. All right, now that we have our bronze guard forged, it's time to do a little bit of rough grinding on it just to get it closer to the shape we need it to be. Now you can see here that our points are both different sizes. That's okay because they're both too long anyway. I'm gonna grind them back quite a bit, refine the shape, repoint them, and then just kind of true everything else up before we go in and mill our slot in the middle where our tang will fit in.
I have the bronze guard that Matt forged for us. I'm just gonna put a little slot in here. He's marked the extreme ends of where he wants it to be. It's gonna be undersized for the tang, but that's because he wants to hand file the fit, make it very, very tight. So I'm just gonna come in here with a 1/4-inch carbide cutter, relieve this out, get a hole all the way through it, and then he'll be able to just match the tang directly to it. It'll fit really tight up against the blade. Since I had undersized the slot when I cut it on the mill, Matt now takes a file and fits it exactly to the size of the tang on this blade. Now that we have the multiple layers on this handle up around the pommel area, I'm going to go to the grinder with a fresh belt and begin grinding it away. The brass that's protruding has to be ground very slowly as it heats up and it will burn the wood if I do it too quickly. Almost every Bowie knife we've made in the shop has been something different. With so many huge, complex builds on Man-at-Arms, it's been truly nice to make a classic American Bowie knife. Click here to subscribe, or click here to watch more episodes. Thanks for watching Man-at-Arms Reforged. We need to know what you want the guys to build, so tell us in the comments below what weapons you want to see next.